All right, so in this video, I want to talk about how to just help atheists and how to point out how illogical their worldview is, because it's very simple. You only need to know a few things. And even though I've studied a lot, especially from James Tour and Stephen Meyer, those are my two favorite Christian apologists, I guess you'd say, or proponents of intelligent design. And I've also spent so much time listening to atheists. It really boils down to what I'm going to teach you, that is the foundation of atheism. And if I've got this video game on my phone where the goal is to shoot these cannonballs at a castle and bring the castle down. And I never shoot high. I always shoot at the foundation, and that makes everything above it crumble. So if you can learn these few things, these few questions to ask atheists, then you can try to help them be delivered from atheism, from the illogical and unscientific view that is known as atheism, which is a lack of a belief in God, because the proof of God is obvious. And what we'll find out is that they just don't want to believe. That's really what it boils down to. So the first thing that I talk about is DNA. So the question you could ask them is, do you believe, do you think, and do you agree that DNA is information/code? Now, if they're honest, they're going to say yes. Many times, I did an interview with Godless Engineer the other night, and he kept trying to tell me that DNA is not information. It's just these chemicals. And that's like saying a letter is not information. A letter is just ink and paper. And we know, who cares about the medium, it's information. And so I worded it differently. I was like, well, do you believe the information for that organism is in that DNA? And he would say yes. So pretty much, you could just, you can easily get them to say that DNA is information. I even later in the interview, I said, would you agree that DNA is a recipe for the organism? And he agreed with that. So you could word it differently to try to get them to admit that DNA is information. It's code, it's a recipe for the organism. It's not binary code like a computer, but it is a type of code, and then look up the definition for code. You'll find out that you have to look up definitions a lot. And ask people, can we look up the definition of code or information? Would you agree that that describes DNA? The second point is you ask them, well, do you believe that information or code only comes from a mind? And then, they're going to disagree with you typically on one of these. And then you could just, kindly say, well, I disagree with you. I think information only comes from a mind. And then the next question or statement is that, if they were to agree with you on that, which is rare, then you would say, well, then would you agree that there is a mind behind DNA? And so that's the point. You're trying to get them to see that DNA or code could not come about by accident. They believe that the first living cell came about by accident. That's called abiogenesis, non-life becoming life. You could ask them, do you believe that first cell had DNA in it, and that DNA had the recipe for that single cell organism? And then you could ask them, do you really think that's logical to believe that the first living cell somehow obtained a recipe that came from no mind? Because then ask them to look at the complexity of a single cell. It is, they say it's simple, but then I assume they just haven't investigated how complex a single cell is. Because there's no such thing as a simple cell. A cell is able to metabolize and reproduce. It has all these different mechanisms inside of it. And then the next thing is they'll say, well, who created your God, right? And then that's where you say that, hey, I believe a definition of God is that he is eternal. He was never created. And then I say something to the effect of, well, do you believe, you really have two options, do you believe that matter accidentally created information and code and life and consciousness, or do you believe a life form outside of our three spatial dimensions created life and DNA and code? And so then the next thing I would do is I tell them, because clearly they're not buying what I'm saying. So I say, well, if you're really interested in the evidence, please go listen to James Tour and Stephen Meyer. They're both scientists. And then I would say, check out a video by Carl Sagan. Now, most atheists love Carl Sagan. I don't know if he was an atheist. He was at least an agnostic. But he made this great video about the fourth dimension and the tesseract, which is a four-dimensional cube, a cube in the fourth dimension. And he does a great job. This agnostic or atheist does a great job describing what it would be like if a being outside of our physical universe contacted us. And it's beautiful. So really get them to do those two things. Ask them the questions about DNA Do you believe it's code? Would you agree that code only comes from a mind? And then would you agree that DNA has a mind behind it? And then when they start to try to discredit God, that there are no eternal beings, well, then be like, hey, listen to Carl Sagan, and that will help you visualize and understand that it is possible for a being to be from outside of our universe who is not under the same laws as us. And so if he's not bound by three spatial dimensions, is it really hard to believe that he's not bound by time either, that he has no beginning? So that's the best way to do it from everything that I've learned. Because of course, if DNA is code, then you would need a programmer to program it in the original cell, which I'm a young earth creationist, but I try to play to their evolutionary idea that if they believe that we have a common ancestor, the first cell couldn't have come about by chance because somebody would have had to write the code. And then if they believe in evolution, well, I don't believe in atheistic evolution. If anything, it'd have to be theistic evolution, that God guided these mutations, because you'd have to have a programmer making changes to the code that would help and not destroy the organism.